Okay, so a couple things to remind you of as we get started. First of all, that the third reflection essay is due the 3rd, March 3rd. Hopefully, if you are watching this or listening to this after that, you have completed it. But make sure to get that essay in. Also, don't forget the second exam is a week from today, so March 10th. Make sure to be looking at the study guide. If you have any questions, get in contact with me about that. Also, don't forget, I sent out an email the other day about completing any assignments that haven't been completed to this point. Midterm grades are in, and a lot of you are probably not doing as well as you would like, and largely that comes from not completing some of the assignments. So, between now and spring break, I would encourage you to get as much as possible done, so that you can get some credit for that, and it can help boost your grade here as we're moving past midterm into the second half of the semester. Today we finish up with Buddhism. On Thursday a week ago, we had focused on talking about the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and talking about his background in life, what tradition, according to tradition, had led him to become the Buddha, and some things related to that. We had also talked about some of the Buddha's teaching, what were the main points of Buddhism, and then where we finished up was talking about the different types of Buddhism, noting that there are 3 major types with a few subtypes that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Theravada, one of the older forms, Mahayana, also an umbrella term of several different types, and then Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. And like I said, we'll talk about those distinctions a little more here. Theravada Buddhism, of course, we noted was a very conservative type of Buddhism, focused on the Four Noble Truths, emphasizing the monastic life, and not really looking at any innovations of Buddhism after that point. The ideal person within Theravada is the Arhat, the individual who through their own self-effort achieves nirvana. Mahayana, as we noted, is an umbrella term for a variety of Buddhisms that are focused on a more universal approach to Buddhism. The suggestion being that anyone can achieve nirvana, irrespective of whether you're a monk or a nun or just a common Buddhist. The hero in Mahayana Buddhism is the Bodhisattva. Right? This is the enlightenment hero, the individual who foregoes final nirvana in order to help other people reach it. So just to kind of sum up and compare these two, I want to note a couple things in thinking about how these two relate. Theravada, as we noted, emphasized the monastic life, renouncing your connections with family, taking on vows of poverty and chastity. These things were necessary to achieve nirvana. But for Mahayanists, anyone, even the common person, the laity, can achieve nirvana. You don't have to shut yourself off from the rest of the world like you would as a monk or a nun. Theravada, of course, tended to focus on the historical Buddha, emphasize his life. There's something unique and special about him, where in many types of Mahayana Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama is just one example of people who have taken on the mantle of a Buddha, an enlightened one. And so really Mahayana thinks, of course, that he's important, but that there are others out there that would be just as important as well. Theravada emphasizes personal effort. We can see that, of course, in the the idea of the arhat. This is a person through their own self-effort. This is not someone who relies on other individuals. This is the monk or the nun off by themselves, meditating, seeking insight, and achieving nirvana. On the other hand, of course, from Mahayana, right, the heavens are filled with people who are wanting to reach out to others and help them achieve nirvana. It's not something that you have to go through on your own. And as we mentioned, of course, that's exemplified in the arhat and the bodhisattvas. And so all of this demonstrates to us these two different types of Buddhism, their different approaches, and how they have developed over the centuries. I want to talk about two specific types of Mahayana Buddhism. These are not necessarily representative of all types, nor are they the only ones. I believe Cordovan goes into other ones that would be examples of Mahayana Buddhism. But I want to focus on these two. The first of these is Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land is a rather interesting one for me. It developed probably around the 300s CE, so this side of Christ, in India, but really becomes popular in Japan in the so-called Middle Ages. Pure Land Buddhism focuses on a man known as Amitayus or Amenhotpa. His name in Japanese is Amida, and so that's the one that tends to get used a lot. Amida was believed to have been a Buddha who lived prior to Siddhartha Gautama. Now remember, of course, the Mahayanists believe that there are a variety of Buddhas, not just Gautama. Well, one of the things that was unique about Amida is that Amida supposedly had taken upon himself these bodhisattva vows. He had vowed that he was not going to achieve final enlightenment until he was able to help others achieve enlightenment. And specifically, one of his vows was to create a pure land. Now, here is one of the places in Buddhism that is similar to the monotheistic religions, including Christianity. This is the closest thing in Buddhism that we have towards a heaven, and that the Pure Land was going to be a place where people could reach, right? People that wanted to achieve enlightenment, people could reach, and it would be a place of streets and buildings made of jewels. It's going to be a place where there's no suffering or death, and all those kind of things would be unknown in heaven, and these kind of things would be, it would be a place that would be better for individuals to achieve nirvana. And so this is one of the things that Amida decides to do. He's going to create this Pure Land. And the way that you achieve this Pure Land, the way that you're reborn into the Pure Land instead of being reborn life after life in this world, is through your trust in Amida, your faith in Amida. It is not through any sort of works or meditation, but through belief that Amida can help you achieve this. Now remember, this is the 300s in India when this starts. So it's very likely here that there's a possibility, we shouldn't rule it out, that there's an influence here of Christianity, because by the 300s especially it would have traveled that far. There are some historical traditions that the Apostle Thomas had reached India. I wouldn't know exactly how accurate we can consider that, but certainly by the 3rd century after Jesus, the likelihood that Christianity has reached this far is very likely. So, this trust in Amida, in Amida's grace, seems to be something that could very likely be shaped by Christianity. And so the idea was that through chanting Amida's name, Namu Amida Butsu, which means homage to Amida Buddha, if you repeat that before death, you're going to be reborn in the Pure Land. And so, again, this another kind of emphasis on this is faith, this is grace, this is not this is not some sort of works or even self-power. Another, and perhaps pretty popular or pretty well-known form of Mahayana Buddhism is Zen. Zen originated in China as Chan Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is the Japanese name, and so we tend to know it more by the Japanese name. Around the 600s CE, and even into the probably about the 1200s is when it makes its way to Japan. The focus in Zen is on a specific type of meditation known as Zazen. The focus here is to experience knowledge. Much of Buddhism, although there is a scriptural tradition and intellectual tradition in Buddhism, a lot of Buddhism, especially Mahayana, is based on experience of knowledge and not, intellectual knowledge. And so the focus is on this very stiff, well, not stiff, but the very still sitting meditation that is very focused. It's kind of a self-power individual effort. And the focus of Zazen is to clear the mind. It's the focus of a person is to experience enlightenment in this life, right? That Zazen is going to help you achieve that. And so what they are looking for in Zen Buddhism is the experience of Satori. Satori is the enlightenment experience in Zen Buddhism. This is what you're looking for. It's this flash of light, or not flash of light, flash of insight that you are to experience. And this is essentially what is achieved here is the insight into the interconnectedness of all things. And so you have been meditating for this insight. You're not meditating on a scripture. You're not meditating on the Buddhas. You are meditating for insight. And so, the Zazen, Zen Buddhism tends to be what we might call iconoclastic, right? Meaning that they want to break down traditions. They're anything that's it's an idol or an icon, tear that down. Doctrine is a crutch, right? Teachings are obstacles, and they distract you from, achieving Satori. Even being a Buddhist, and really saying, well, I'm a Buddhist, can be pretentious in such a way that too needs to be destroyed. One of the ways that Satori is achieved through this meditation is through meditating on what are known as koans, or cases, some of which you probably have heard of. Essentially, these are these problems that people are to meditate on until they come up with an answer. And by resolving this problem, they will achieve Satori. So the traditional one, the classic one, is what is the sound of one hand clapping? Some other ones would be, what was your original face before your parents were born? They're not meant to have this kind of logical answer. They are meant to be, something that you work through. You're searching for insight. And so there's very upright posture, lack of movement. You're clearing your mind. You have inward calmness. Right? You're contacting your natural mind, so to speak, is what the way it's talked about. And you're meditating on these problems, attempting to discover what it is that will help you achieve Satori. The third major type of Buddhism is known as Tibetan Buddhism, or Vajrayana. The term Vajrayana means diamond vehicle. It's also referred to as the thunderbolt vehicle. It had developed, Vajrayana had developed as a type of Mahayana, but it had really connected with people in Tibet and developed into a school that was pretty distinct or separate from Tibetan Buddhism, or excuse me, from Mahayana Buddhism, and so it develops into another form. Around the 8th century, the 700 CE, is where Vajrayana really begins to move into Tibet. It had started as a movement in India around the 5th century. It became the principal form of Buddhism in Tibet and is usually referred to as Tibetan Buddhism. It does not seem like there are other forms of Vajrayana Buddhism around except what is found in Tibet. And what's also distinct about Vajrayana from, well, especially Theravada. Theravada, of course, emphasized that it takes several lifetimes before you can achieve nirvana. And so over the course of lifetimes, you are warming up, right? You're developing the things that will eventually lead to nirvana. For Tibetan Buddhism, it's known as the thunderbolt vehicle, right? In this lifetime, you can achieve nirvana. You don't need successive lives to achieve nirvana. And so the speed is a very important distinction. But one of the things about Vajrayana as it becomes Tibetan Buddhism is that it has gradually merged with the indigenous traditions of Tibet. Focus on certain types of deity, what's known as deity yoga, this kind of meditating on oneself as a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, the use of prayer flags, these flags that are, they are put out, and on them are printed prayers. And as they are flapping in the breeze, the prayers are being sent out to the universe. And as the flags over the course of several years begin to deteriorate from the elements, the prayers again are kind of becoming part of the universe. The use of prayer wheels. A prayer wheel is a 12-sided wheel, usually of stone or bronze. And each side has a prayer written on it, and so Tibetan Buddhists will go by these prayer wheels and they will spin them as fast as they can and get them moving. And the idea is that as they're spinning, right, all these prayers are being offered to the deities, to the bodhisattvas. And so the idea is that you are getting credit for those prayers without having to actually think or meditate or pray them. And a lot of this focus is on, prayers for enlightenment, prayers for, getting rid of illusion, those kind of things. And so there are a couple of things there that seem to be things that aren't part of traditional Buddhism, right? We hadn't talked about them in the other forms of Buddhism. Also, very popular in Tibetan Buddhism are the creation of mandalas. Now, this is more of a monastic practice. As you can see in the picture in the lower right-hand corner, two Tibetan monks working on that artwork. A mandala is a sand painting, and as you can see from the picture, very intricate, very colorful, very symbolic. There are a lot of symbols. I don't know if you can really notice, but in the inner circle, you will see several wheels, the cross shape, and then the dividing one at each of the, there's one at the top, one at the bottom, and then some other ones around the focus, and then there's other things with it. They are meant to be teaching symbols, Right? They teach about something related to Buddhist teaching or something like that. But the thing that I find interesting about this is that these monks will spend upwards of a week creating these mandalas, and they will have to do so very intricately, right? To get the colors exactly in the right place. We're talking about grains of sand, right? And so if you've done any sand painting, you probably haven't done something as intricate as this, but it's very difficult dealing with sand, getting it where it needs to go and not disturbing the things around it. And so for usually about a week, this is put together. And then at the end of the week, the monks will sweep it up, essentially destroying it. If they do it in the presence of other people, sometimes these things end up in a museum, right? A performance exhibit. People might take bags of sand home with them, with the idea being that they've been blessed by the practice of the mandala. Or the sand will be put into running water and just kind of dispersed. And it too is a teaching opportunity, right? When you think about it, you have detachment here, right? And this you really worked hard to create this, and yet you destroy it, right? So you have to. It's an exhibit of detachment from your own efforts. Impermanence, right? It doesn't last. Within a week, it's gone. And so not only is it teaching through the colors and the symbols, it's also teaching through the construction and the destruction of it as well. Mantras also very important. Remember, these are chants found in a variety of traditions. We've seen these in the other Indian Eastern traditions as well, but these sacred chants believed to bring spiritual blessings, usually passed down from master to pupil, meant to be recited, thought about, meditated on to experience enlightenment. The leader of Tibetan Buddhism is a man named the Dalai Lama. The term Dalai Lama means ocean of wisdom. The current Dalai Lama, who is getting very old in age, I believe he is in pretty close to his 80s now, it was a man named Tenzin Gyatso. Well, I guess he still goes by that name in some situations, but largely known as just the Dalai Lama. Currently, he lives in exile in India. In the 1940s and 50s, China, which had fallen to, or which had become a communist government, sought to get rid of all sorts of expressions of religion. But especially as they began moving into Tibet, kind of took Tibet over, they were also interested in controlling Tibetan Buddhism, and so the Dalai Lama and many Tibetan Buddhists left. There are still several different Tibetan Buddhists there as well. But the Dalai Lama, the 14th of the Dalai Lamas, has lived in India since then. But he also, of course, travels extensively throughout the world at various times, to spread his message of peace, of the unity of religions, religious goals, of achieving enlightenment. All of these things are the pursuit of happiness, I believe, is one of his book titles. He is believed to be the incarnation of a bodhisattva, the reincarnation of a bodhisattva. And as I said, so he's the 14th. So he's the 14th incarnation of this bodhisattva. And supposedly what will happen, and what has happened in the past, is that as the Dalai Lama dies, he will give clues to where he will be reborn for the followers to, after his death, begin looking for him. And along the way, they will investigate and interview a variety of young children born within a certain time period after the death of the Dalai Lama. Usually believed to be a young boy. When Tenzin Gyatso was identified as the Dalai Lama, he was presented with a variety of objects, some of which belonged to the previous Dalai Lama, and supposedly he picked them out, which ones were the ones that belonged to the previous Dalai Lama. And that was kind of the last component of this search for the Dalai Lama, ultimately identifying him as this one. One of the things that's become problematic, however, for this Dalai Lama is that China, the Chinese government, who has a very strange relationship with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has not only been going around speaking his message, but has also been trying to call attention to the oppression of the Tibetan people by the Chinese. And so the Chinese government has made the claim that they will be the ones to determine the rebirth of the Dalai Lama. Right? That they're the ones that's going to make the final decision, with the assumption being by a lot of non-Chinese people suspicious of this, is that they're going to find someone that they can raise to parrot the Chinese message of a variety of support the Chinese government, etc. Yeah, the occupation in Tibet isn't a problem, things like that. Well, they've done something similar. Tibetan Buddhism has had a variety of different schools of thought, and there have been times in the history of Tibet that there have been fights between these different schools. But they merged a couple of centuries ago, and the leaders of these different movements are still a part of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama being at the top, but there's also the Karmapa Lama and the Panchen Lama, who had been, these other leaders. And I believe it was the Panchen Lama was identified as a boy in Tibet. This is a couple of decades ago. And the Chinese government immediately snatched him up. And a couple of years later put forth this guy as the Panchen Lama. His message is support the Chinese government, et cetera, et cetera. So this has happened with other leaders, supposed rebirth. So the concern is that they're going to do that with the Dalai Lama as well. And so Gyatso has said, I'm not going to be reborn in Tibet. I'm going to be reborn somewhere else. And so he's claiming that he's not even going to be reborn where the Chinese can control that. But obviously he's getting older, so this is something that the Tibetan Buddhists will be facing, in a few years, is what to do about the Dalai Lama. At the very least, of course, there will be the opportunity for the Chinese to put forth an alternative Dalai Lama, right? So one identified by the community, one identified by the government, which will at least throw confusion among Tibetan Buddhists. And so, at the very least, that's probably likely to happen here in the next couple years. Let's talk about some Buddhist practices. Buddhism largely died out in India around the time period of the 12th to 15th century. There are still a few Buddhists in India. There are Tibetan Buddhists, as we mentioned, right? They developed in Tibet, but they flee to India. But it is not certainly as prominent as it once was. But there's still a lot of things that are shaped by Indian culture. And, there's still some things that are rather interesting about Buddhist practices that have been shaped by Indian culture, but that have also been shaped by other things as well. We've emphasized several times already how meditation is a very important part of Buddhism of the varieties. All schools consider meditation to be very important, even though they're going to differ on what it is meant to achieve, how it is to be done, a variety of things like that. In the history of Buddhism, most of its history meditation has been an elite practice, right? It's the monastics, or it's the people in the upper echelons of Buddhism that have practiced. But in more recent years, it has become a more common practice. Part of this may be due to the westernization of Buddhism and how throughout the 20th century Westerners have kind of taken Buddhist ideas just like they had done with Hinduism and kind of incorporated some of those things into their own lives, making meditation something more widespread. Mindfulness is the goal in meditation in general, and it's essentially a very extremely important part of the entire path towards enlightenment. And mindfulness, of course, is one of the steps on the Eightfold Path. And so a lot of meditation in a lot of different types of Buddhism focuses on, the meditating on suffering, on impermanence, the fact that there is not a self. The practice of meditation is very simple to understand. Right? You remain motionless, you focus all your awareness on your breath, and you let go of all intervening thoughts, with the idea being that you're creating this heightened awareness, this higher state that will help cultivate this spiritual insight. But the actual practice of meditation is very difficult. I don't know if you've ever tried to kind of clear your mind of all your thoughts, right, and remain focused and not be distracted by other things. But it's often something that takes people some time to achieve, right? So this is not something that most people are able to do kind of immediately, but is something that you must undergo throughout a period of time. Remember when we were talking about the Eightfold Path, that idea of right mindfulness, right effort, is something that will that it's skillful, right? You're trying to develop this and become better at clearing your mind and remaining focused and not being distracted by the world around you. Another rather interesting Buddhist practice, again, several of these are not across the board. They're not found in every form of Buddhism, but they're just some practices I thought were kind of interesting, is the conjoined practices of punya and dana. Punya means merit, and dana refers to giving, a giving ritual. You can kind of see this in the picture in the upper right-hand corner. With a lot of monastics in various religious traditions, a lot of how they survive is based off of the larger community of that religion supporting them, right? That they provide for their needs, providing food, providing finances, etc. And the same kind of thing's true in many forms of Buddhist monasticism as well. And so dana is a way of giving back to the monastics, helping those that are, trying to show the common people the way to nirvana. And so the monastic community, according to some traditions, were instructed to be a field of merit, where people could plant good karma, could plant devotions and harvest good karma, right? That's what I meant. So they're planting donations and they're harvesting good karma. And so punya refers to this idea of by helping out monastics or by doing good acts, you are making merit. Now, some traditions say that you need good merit to achieve a good rebirth. Merit making can lead you closer to nirvana. And so by making these donations, by focusing on these spiritual giving, you can achieve this merit, this good karma. Now, in the history of Buddhism, some aspects of this have been really, really laid out in very intricate types of ways. So, for example, in this scorecard from the 1500s, a man named Zhaofian Yuan kind of created this guide to how you can formulate merit and how you can understand your merit. Now, again, this is just one example. This isn't something that's representative, but it is rather kind of an interesting approach to this issue. And so this idea of, the balance of karma, right, good and bad, but also merit, right, merit helping you create good karma. While certain actions are better, are going to achieve more merit, while certain actions are worse and are going to achieve demerits and worse demerits. How they came up with this list, how this person came up with this list is, I don't really know, but it's a rather interesting one. So, for example, if you save someone's life, that's 100 merits. If you cure a major illness, that's 10. Prevent a lawsuit, 5. Chant a Buddhist scripture, that's 1. I've not seen, is there a certain number? Like, if you hit 10,000, do you get the express lane to nirvana? There's no indication of that. But on the other side, of course, you have the demerits. If you cause a death, if you rape someone, or you end a family lineage, 100. If you mistreat an orphan, 10 demerits. If you waste food, that's 1 demerit. But to make up for it, you can just chant a Buddhist scripture, right? So if you throw out too much food, you chant a Buddhist scripture, or help repair a public road. Okay, the public road. But if you repair a public road, that's 1 merit. If you bury an animal, that's 3. Again, I don't know how all this was developed. This is a rather interesting scorecard. But this idea, right, the greater idea of, your actions kind of balance each other out, and ultimately you want to do more good in the world than harm. And so, again, it's not representative, just an interesting little example from Buddhist history. Another expression of Buddhist practice involves the observance of festivals connected to the life of the Buddha. Things like remembering his death, the date he achieved enlightenment. There is a difference among Buddhists on the date of some of these things, as far as what day of the year you should be celebrating them on. A lot of it's shaped regionally, but still the idea of remembering the Buddhist life. Buddhists, of course, have a variety of rituals connected with death. Many of them, especially in India and some other places in East Asia, very similar to other ceremonies in India, so cremation, for example. But although there are some similarities between Buddhist practices and other traditions, it also becomes a time for a reminder of the Buddhist teachings on impermanence, on rebirth, detachment. Ultimately, in a lot of these death practices, you see this kind of tension between, certain claims about Buddhism and the actual lived practice of it. So the idea of achieving, there are some practices that you, as the griever, right, the mourner, the family left behind, can engage in, and that can transfer karma to the deceased. Which is kind of this, is karma something affected by your own actions, or can other people shape it? How does the proper performance of ritual add into all this. But essentially this kind of notion of inevitability, all things are going to pass away, you shouldn't be attached to someone. All these things are a part of the death rituals of Buddhists. Particularly interesting are the practices related to Tibetan Buddhism. There's a lot of quite a bit of difference between Tibetan Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism. One of the most widely read books in the West, as far as Buddhist texts, has to do with death, known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Essentially, the Book of the Dead is a manual on how to perform funerals in Tibetan Buddhism. The proper name, or at least one of them, of the book is Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate States. It's believed that the consciousness goes through 3 states after death. Usually believed that between death and rebirth are about 49 days. And as it passes through these states, these intermediate states between death and rebirth, there is the possibility that that consciousness could still achieve liberation and not be reborn. And this is achieved through hearing some things that are spoken, particularly by lamas, Buddhist monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks, during this time period. And so this person passing from birth to death. It's believed that, here you are in this intermediate state, not dead, right, not physical anymore, but not quite reborn. And so, this is an opportunity where it's easier for someone to recognize the absolute truths of reality and experience enlightenment. The first stage is known as the clear light state, or the experience of the great luminosity. Essentially, the idea is that the soul, the consciousness, not the soul, the consciousness encounters this blinding white light that is terrifying to it. And as the lamas read these passages, the consciousness is encouraged to stay calm, to not be afraid. That in effect, the great luminosity, this blinding white light, is a projection of the mind. It is not real. And that if you realize that the luminosity is not real, but something that you've projected from yourself, you can achieve nirvana. And that will release you from samsara. But if you can't quite recognize the luminosity as a projection, you should try to see yourself and the light as one united element and not 2 separate things. And of course, most people don't achieve this. And so they move on to the next state, which is the encounter of a parade of ugly, wrathful Buddhas, about 58 of them, and then a parade of beautiful Buddhas, about 42 of them. The goal at this stage for the consciousness is to not be too repelled by the wrathful Buddhas or too attracted by the benevolent Buddhas, but simply recognize now that these are just a projection of your mind, of your consciousness. They are not real. If you can accomplish this, if you can recognize the emptiness of this distinction, you will achieve liberation. But again, most people don't do that. So they go to rebirth. The consciousness sees various scenes of animals having sex with each other, human beings having sex with each other, and they are drawn to one of these pairs, right? That these are going to become your parents. And it's believed that that you're going to be reborn in one of 6 realms: the realms of the gods or the demigods, of humans, animals, of the hungry ghosts, or demons. Okay? And so you're drawn to one of these places. Your karma, however, is going to shape that. It's going to cause you to join one of these scenes, become one with it, and be reborn into it. The words of the text are said by the Lama. They're meant to provide a reference point for the consciousness. And so the focus is that as you are preparing for dying, you need to have a positive mental state so that after death, your consciousness will be in the best place to experience this transition. After this takes place, the body is stripped after a period of mourning. It's put in a fetal position, wrapped in a wool blanket, and then we'll experience what is known as a sky burial in Tibet or in Tibetan Buddhist communities. They'll take the body to a remote mountain. The flesh and the muscle will be stripped from the bones. The bones will be ground to dust, and essentially it will be fed to the vultures. If someone was a beggar or destitute or was a widow, their bodies will be buried in water. Thieves, murderers, the leprous, the people that had smallpox, other diseases are buried in the earth. And so the goal is, of course, this sky burial. So again, one of the things that's quite interesting about Tibetan Buddhism that makes it different from other types of Buddhism. Let's talk briefly about some of the ideas or how some of the expressions of Buddhism in the United States. As with Hinduism, the first experience that a lot of people had with Buddhism was through the Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, others. But as they were translating Hindu scriptures, they also turned to Buddhist scriptures and translated them as well. Here too, a lot of it was the Transcendentalists trying to say, okay, these are like our ideas, right? They're not becoming Buddhists, but they're understanding Buddhist concepts in terms of their own views of Transcendentalism, this universal spirit, and some of the other things that are going on. However, Buddhism doesn't really make much of an inroads in the 19th century in the United States because a lot of people believe it to be very pessimistic. It's so focused on suffering. While in the 19th century in the United States, there were a lot of positive people, right? An optimistic time. And so the focus on inevitability, impermanence, suffering was something that a lot of people were not attracted to in the 19th century. In the 20th century, however, the work of D.T. Suzuki, began to bring some of a change to that. Suzuki came to the United States in the late 19th century, serving as a translator of Buddhist texts. In the 1930s, however, he started lecturing in a variety of universities throughout the United States, places like Harvard, Princeton, Yale. Served as a visiting professor at several of these universities. Would go on to write or translate a variety of Buddhist books into English. Suzuki was a Zen Buddhist, but a lot of his early works were just on Buddhism in general, figuring that Westerners didn't have much knowledge of Buddhism, and so just focusing on just learning about Buddhism, and then going on and these later works were specifically about Zen. Also very influential in the development of Buddhism in the United States was the work of the Beat poets. Suzuki found an audience, especially in these kind of American intellectuals who were dissatisfied with American culture. So people like Alan Watts, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, who had been Catholic but converts to Buddhism. It was a lot of things that the Beat poets already felt about American culture. In the 50s and 60s, they're concerned about the imperialism of the United States, in Korea, in Vietnam, in other places. They're concerned of the hypocrisy in American culture, and especially in American Christianity. And this emphasis on this spiritual enlightenment, respect for all forms of life, spoke to a lot of these people who were already disaffected with American culture and religion. And so it provides them a way to continue their critique of these things. And so this becomes very useful for this particular group. And through that, it's spread to others as well. Last thing I want to talk about, of course, but the last thing I want to talk about is popular culture. Buddhism has made inroads in popular culture in the United States throughout the latter part of the 20th century and even into the 21st century. It showed up among music groups, the Beastie Boys, popular rappers in the 1990s, wrote a song called Bodhisattva Vow, which said, think on the Dharma and the enlightened ones who've graduated samsara. So it shows up in music. It shows up among celebrities, a variety of celebrities, people like Richard Gere, Bruce Lee, known for Kung Fu, but was a Zen Buddhist. And so a lot of his practice of Kung Fu was related to his notions about Buddhism. It shows up in things like sports as well. Phil Jackson, very popular coach with the Bulls, with the Lakers, is also a Buddhist. This shows up even in I believe it was a Super Bowl commercial a couple of years ago, where Phil Jackson stars in this car commercial, and he's referred to as the Zen Master. He wrote his memoirs, Sacred Hoops, where he advised his reader, if you meet the Buddha in the lane, feed him the ball, right? And so this kind of combination of sports and Buddhism. And even in popular movies, television shows, things like The Matrix, the impermanence of reality, the falseness of reality, there's some Hindu Buddhist concepts in that. A lot in Star Wars as well. There's a lot of connections here. The Ewoks, usually despised by a lot of very hardcore fans, but they spoke high-speed Tibetan. So they took Tibetan speaking and then kind of sped it up. So there's that connection. The Jedi were to be detached from possessions, from people. The idea of desire being the path to the desire being the path to the dark side. So you're supposed to have this disinterested compassion. Even the idea, of course, of being absorbed in the Force has some connotations here, this overlap between Hinduism and Buddhism. So there's a lot of things that are really kind of interesting in how Buddhism is making inroads into American culture in a wide variety of ways, some of which are more obvious, right, obvious Buddhist ideas, and some of which that are not. So that finishes us up with Buddhism for this section. The next class we'll be talking about we'll talk about comparing the two, Hinduism and Buddhism, as well as thinking about dialogue between Hindus and Buddhists and Christians. Where are some places? Because with Christianity and Judaism, there are some obvious places where conversations can start. It would seem on the surface of it, it's a lot more difficult when we come to some of these Eastern religions, because even the whole worldview is completely distinct. And so we'll talk about that on Tuesday's class. Again, don't forget, get the reflective essay in. Don't forget about the exam coming up, and don't forget to complete any assignments that you haven't completed up to this point. And so we'll see you on Tuesday.